The tents appeared suddenly in the dead of night without any warning. There was quite a commotion at City Hall, especially since even the mayor had no idea they were arriving. Whatever the issue was, they must have resolved it because the gypsy circus stayed. For our small town, which couldn't even host a proper fair, this was huge news. That's how I ended up with my older brother Tommy and his friends that evening. I was just 15 at the time, and while we lived in a quiet little town, my mother was originally from Boston. She never would have let me roam around alone. But if she'd known how awful Tommy and his friends really were, she might have thought I'd be safer by myself. "How much cash do you have?" Frankie asked, giving my shoulder a rough punch. Of all of Tommy's friends, I despised Frankie the most. He had a habit of hitting, kicking, and mocking me, while my brother laughed along. He was twice my size was scrawny back then, but I often dreamed about the day I'd finally stand up to him, to all. I handed over the $20 Mum had given me, but kept the 5-eyed hidden in the brim of my hat. I had plans for that. At the very least, I was going to get a candy apple later. With Dad being a dentist, sweets like that were rare in our house. As soon as we stepped inside the Midway, they ditched me. I'd never been to a circus before. There weren't many rides, but massive tents loomed in every direction. Barkers shouted out to the crowds, promising sights of exotic beasts or grotesque oddities of nature. I chuckled at that last one. I'd already come in with my own bunch of oddities. I still wanted to see a lion. They always seemed so majestic on TV. Reluctantly, I handed over to Dallas and stepped inside the tent. The air was thick with the sense of sawdust, sweat, and animal dung. But what I saw inside was mesmerizing. The creatures were unlike anything I had ever seen. I picked up a stray peanut from the ground and fed it to an elephant, then found a spot on a bench to wait for the show. The lions stole the spotlight for me. I knew they were big, but seeing one in person was something else entirely. When the lion tamer placed his head inside the beast's gaping jaws, I held my breath. The lion's incisors were as long as my fingers, and its back teeth canestles. I remembered from one of my dad's books were like razors designed to shear through meat. There was no way I'd ever have the nerve to try what the tamer did. After the show, I briefly considered spending another $2 to watch it again. But the thought of a candy apple was too tempting. As I made my way to the food stands, a voice called out, "Get your fortune read for just $1. The sight of her stopped me in my tracks. Her face would haunt my dreams for the rest of my life. If only she could have seen her own fortune instead of mine that night. She didn't deserve what was coming. I couldn't look away. Her eyes were mesmerizing. One a piercing blue, the other brown, just like mine. I wondered if it was some trick, maybe contact lenses, to make her stand out more. The contrast was unsettling, but she was beautiful. Her long black hair, full lips, and the genie-like outfit that revealed her smooth, sun-kissed skin captivated me. Hunger took a back seat to hormones, and I let her lead me into her tent. She took my hand, gently stretching it out before her. She began speaking, her words full of vague predictions and cryptic insights. After a moment, she paused, looked me directly in the eye, and said, "You need to stand up for yourself. Don't let others control your destiny." Those words lingered with me long after. I often wondered if she truly saw that in me. It was sound advice I wish I had followed. After the reading, she walked me out, her hand resting lightly on my arm. Well, what do we have here? Frankie's booming voice shattered the moment. Looks like the little monkey found himself a girlfriend. Her grip on my arm tightened briefly before she smiled coolly. "I'm taking a break," she said calmly, stepping forward. But Frankie wasn't about to let her go that easily. He grabbed her arm as she passed, while Tommy and James moved to block her path. My heart pounded, and I wanted to tell them to leave her alone. But the words caught in my throat, stuck like a stone. "Wait a second," Frankie said with a smirk. "I've got $1. How about you read my fortune?" He leaned closer, his tone dripping with mockery. "Or better yet, what'll $10 get me?" To my horror, he grabbed her by the waist and yanked her against him. She fought to free herself, spitting sharp words in a language I didn't recognize before spitting directly onto his shoe. Frankie's face twisted with anger. He backhanded her hard and dragged her back into the tent. I turned to run, but James was quicker. He stuck out his foot, and I went crashing into the dirt, tasting blood as my face hit the ground. Before I could recover, James grabbed me by the collar and hauled me to my feet. I heard the ominous click of a blade. James pressed the tip against my back. "One move, and I'll sever your spine," he hissed. "Snitches end up in ditches." What happened next lasted only minutes, but it felt like an eternity. Inside that tent, they brutalized her. At first, I heard her struggling, her muffled cries of resistance. Then, nothing. That silence was more chilling than anything else. I was left trembling, tears mixing with blood and snot as I choked on my fear. People passed by, oblivious to the horror unfolding just steps away. No one seemed to notice. No one cared. But I knew something was horribly, irreparably wrong. The newspaper reported that her father found her naked and beaten in that tent. 2 days passed before she could give the police a description. When a squad car pulled up in front of our house, I felt a mix of relief and dread. "Don't you say a word," Tommy hissed, his voice low and venomous, "or I swear I'll end you." I wish I could tell you I did the right thing, that I spoke up and told the police everything. But I didn't. I convinced myself that her description and the DNA evidence would be enough. What I didn't count on was the weight of small-town politics. Frankie, Tommy, and James concocted a vile story. They claimed she was a prostitute who approached them for money, that she became angry when they didn't have enough and threatened to cry rape as revenge. They even suggested another member of the circus had beaten her to make her claims seem real. The judge barely glanced at the evidence. He closed his briefcase and dismissed the charges, letting them walk free. We left the courthouse together, their smug laughter grating against my shame. Dressed in fresh suits and ties, they looked like altar boys, while I felt like I was drowning in guilt. As we stepped outside, an old gypsy woman approached. She muttered something under her breath and traced a strange sign in the air with her crooked finger. Frankie took a step toward her, but James grabbed his arm, holding him back. Nearby, the girl clung to her father, her face swollen and bruised beyond recognition. She whispered something to the old woman and pointed directly at me. The old woman's sharp eyes narrowed, and she made another sign in the air, more deliberate this time. "That's enough," my father said sternly, steering us away. Within a week, the circus was gone, and so were Tommy and his friends. Tommy was the first. While working at the restaurant after school, his hand got caught in the garbage disposal. As the machine tore into his arm, he screamed in agony, ranting about lions' teeth. They thought the pain was driving him mad. He bled out before the ambulance arrived. James was next. He fell off a ladder while helping his father patch their roof. The impact severed his spinal cord. Frankie's death was the most horrific of all. One night, he lost control around Johnson's Bend, and his car burst into flames. Rescuers later said they would never forget his screams. I imagine he's still screaming, still burning, wherever he ended up. The old woman haunted my dreams every night after that. Her words echoed in my mind. "Your crime is silence. You stood quietly and let evil reign. Thus, you sealed your fate." One morning, I woke to a strange sensation on my tongue. It felt rough, almost like bark. When I looked in the mirror, I saw that it was bark growing out of my tongue. Mum was still asleep, and I didn't wake her. Somehow, I knew my time had come. I walked out to the woods behind our house. With every step, my legs grew heavier until I could barely move them through the undergrowth. When I glanced down, I saw they were no longer human. My feet were turning into a tree trunk, roots sprouting and digging deep into the ground. I lifted my hand to touch my tongue, but my arm froze mid-air. Bark spread rapidly, snapping into place like puzzle pieces, covering every inch of me. It didn't surprise me when the girl appeared from between the trees. "I know it wasn't your fault," she said gently. "I begged my Baba to show you mercy. She agreed, but said you must learn a lesson. You will remain a tree until you grow and mature enough to bear fruit. When the first apple falls from your branches, you will be human again. I hope, after this, you will always stand up for yourself and for others." It took 3 years, but the lesson stayed with me, and for that I am grateful.